Thank you all for joining us this morning for our conversation about recovery plans for Main Street organizations. I'm Sherry Stewart with Oregon Main Street, and I'm joined by my fellow state coordinating program directors, Brianne Durham with Washington Main Street and Michael Wagler with Main Street, Iowa. This convening came about because we saw the need to help our network members begin to think about what recovery looks like for your own local Main Street organizations. I know I speak for my fellow coordinating program directors about how impressed we are with the amazing work that you're all doing and how responsive you've been to the business needs of your community members. We're so appreciative of the great work that you're doing and just the range of creativity that we're seeing. We also know that we're facing a whole different landscape in how you will need to care about your organization as we move forward. You know, it's a whole different world in terms of how we're engaging with our board members right now, our volunteers, what funding will look like as we move forward, what promotional and marketing will look like and how we need to pivot and maybe do things a little bit differently, and really the need to focus on strengthening our economic vitality and design activities. In spite of that, I like to remind people about where Main Street was born. You know, Main Street was forged 40 years ago in response to a crisis that was happening in our historic downtowns across the country. And I think that this methodology still serves us really well. It's just how we need to leverage it and pivot our activities as we move forward. And while it's really challenging and a different landscape than we've seen before, we're in some ways in a stronger position because so many of you have been active organizations for a number of years. And your downtowns are stronger than they were when Main Street was forged 40 years ago. Buildings have been restored, we've developed support networks, but organizationally things will change. So what we've forged is a partnership with Oregon Main Street, Iowa, and Washington Main Street. And we formed a recovery action team to help us develop a framework for specific actionable steps to help your boards move forward. Ways that you can focus your efforts over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months and beyond, so that you can leverage the structure of the Main Street approach while you're pivoting your organizational opportunities. Team members include representatives from all of our state programs. Our team lead is Carol Lilly with Main Street, Iowa. And also includes Brianne, Michael, and I as the state coordinators. We're also fortunate to have a National Main Street rep, Norma Ramiez de Miess, who's joining us on the call today and will participate in our conversations. We also feel like the knowledge of what we need to do happens at the local level. And so we're fortunate to have representatives from again, our programs, Deb Sprecher with Woodbine Main Street in Iowa, Todd Cutts with Olympia Downtown Association, and Aaron McCardle with Historic Downtown Chelan Association in Washington, and Liz Hannon with Downtown Oregon City, and Darren Rutledge with Klamath Falls Downtown Association. We really appreciate you local representatives stepping forward and being part of our efforts right now in the face of all the work that we know that you're doing in your community. We know that what we're proposing in terms of putting together a framework and an action plan template, it will be a work in progress. We know National will be conducting further research and working on this effort as well, but we felt compelled to get something in place even in the face of knowing that it was a work in progress, to help you begin to think about what you need to do and get in place with your local communities. We think time is of the essence as our states move forward at looking at a reopening framework in each of our communities. So we're glad you're participating on this call. I'm super excited about our panelists, which I'll hand over to Brianne to kick off this initial discussion. And again, thank you all for participating and for all the good work that you're doing. Brianne.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Just a couple of little housekeeping items before we get going. The early comers to the meeting will have heard this 3 times, so I apologize, but you are all as attendees right now, as opposed to a Zoom meeting where you would see each other. But we do want you to utilize the chat function and especially the Q&A function, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. We will be doing our very best to reserve at least 15 minutes at the end of the discussion for your questions. So please use that Q&A function as things come to mind throughout. The other thing I want to share is that this is being recorded. So if you need to leave, or if you have board members who might want to view this later, we'll be sending that link out. And then lastly, encourage you to use speaker view, which you can find in the upper right corner of your screen. So with that, wanted to give the briefest of introductions for each of our panelists, knowing that I'd much rather them introduce themselves. So we want to thank Norma Ramiez, who is the Senior Program Officer and Director of Leadership Development with the National Main Street Center. Tripp Muldrow, who is an urban planner and partner at Arnett Muldrow, which is a creative planning firm based in Greenville, South Carolina. And then Jim Thompson, the Downtown Economic Development Specialist with the Iowa Economic Development Authority. Thank you three so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. And to kick things off, we just want to say we asked you because of your deep and diverse experience working with Main Street programs, specifically helping communities through economic recovery. So if you wouldn't mind, and we'll ask Tripp to kick it off, could you each just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your experience?
Great. Well, thank you all for attending, and thanks for putting it together. It's a real pleasure to be here. Great to see so many familiar names on the list. Having disaster recovery on your resume is not something that I asked for, but it is something that has allowed, us as a firm and me as a professional to really jump in. We first got involved in what we call Katrina +1. It was a year after Katrina struck, where we worked with the communities in Mississippi that were ravaged by the storm, and ended up continuing working with them after the oil spill. So ended up working with 14 communities there on recovery. That translated into work in Vermont, 8 Vermont Main Street communities that were struck by Tropical Storm Irene. And then sadly, we ended up doing work in places like Sandy Hook, Connecticut after the mass shootings there. And so this is a totally new thing. And so I think that's one of the things that we'll certainly deal with as the panel continues. But it's been very humbling to play that role, working with communities on disaster recovery through the years. Again, it's not something we relish, but it's something that is humbling, and we really respect the hard work that each and every one of you do on the ground. So, thank you.
Just wanted to say that definitely I concur with highlighting our value of the Main Street directors and local leaders. I come from, as far as disaster recovery, with a background on being in Main Street for over 20 years here in the States and at the local level, and nationally with the National Main Street Center for 13 years. So we certainly have seen a number of disasters and the need to guide and support. But before Main Street, I was also involved leading the disaster relief efforts internationally with Hurricane Mitch in Central America, specifically Honduras. And the opportunities to go beyond just relief for the moment, but also rebuild the economy of those areas was something that I have very close to my heart. I understand from being in the forefront, it is emotionally as well as physically draining to be involved in disaster relief. And so again, that's in our minds as we think about and look at opportunities to support your efforts within each Main Street across the country. So looking forward to continuing to provide support, to feeling what is important to keep an eye on, and the opportunities to work together. With the National Main Street Center, we are definitely trying to do that through the webinar series, through the Resource Center that you hopefully have been familiar with now. And so the most recent webinar, Leading Through Crisis, was the kickoff in many ways to see if we can push how to move beyond the crisis mode to get ready for planning. So I'm very inspired by Brianne, Sherry, and Michael, and all of you coming together to see how you can put those next steps into place.
This is Jim Thompson. My official title is a Downtown Economic Development Specialist, but all that is a fancy term to say business specialist. We have two on our team. We're blessed. Robin Bostrom joined our team a few years ago. She does a lot of direct business assistance. I specialize more in real estate development, housing, and government relations. So as I also manage a multi-million-dollar grant program for the state of Iowa, and when bad things happen, I get contacted, whether it's man-made or natural disasters, fires, tornadoes, floods. That's when I roll and assist communities with those kinds of efforts. I'm kind of like Tripp. I didn't really know that was ever going to be part of my job function, but I'm very blessed to be able to assist communities in their time of need. And the truth is, it's all hands on deck when you have a natural disaster or a national pandemic like this. And I think it's really important that where Sherry started, really getting us back to the basics and figuring out exactly why are we strong. And Main Street provides us the tools to be strong. And so I'm excited to be able to do this. Lastly, I did spend 10 years as a city council member in Iowa, elected official. And so I do a lot of trainings where we partner with city governments. And frankly, today, that's more important than ever that Main Streets understand and adopt their role of working with one of their primary local partners, city government. And I think there's a lot of success we can glean from those kinds of relationships too.
That's a great segue, Jim. One of the things we wanted to ask you, knowing we will get into more of the specifics in a minute, is how would you define Main Street's role within a situation like this? We know that COVID-19 is unlike anything we've ever experienced as a nation, but given your experience working with communities, what is Main Street's ideal role right now? How can we be most useful?
Well, from my experience, I work with a lot of executive directors and across the country, and they're saying, how do I build my capacity to get a seat at that economic development table? I was a local director, and it doesn't come to you just handed to you with a silver ribbon bow tied around it. You have to earn it. And now's the time to really say, okay, how can we enhance and make our community better in that partnership with city government? Because when you're having conversations with business owners and building owners, if you wait until a disaster happens to really do what's important to build your capacity as a program, it's way too late. And if we're doing our jobs every day, building that capacity, we will earn that seat at the table, and then we can be in those conversations how best to meet in the middle between property owners, businesses, and city government to really build that tax base back up. Because frankly, I'm scared to death. A lot of cities are saying we don't know what our tax revenue is going to be after this. Well, now's the time to be focusing on what we could do to really make sure we're enhancing that tax base.
Yeah, one of the things I really appreciated that Norma said in her webinar a couple weeks ago was about how Main Street has been pivoting toward really owning the fact that we are economic development. And hopefully that's been a work in progress over time to lead you to being, having that seat at the table right now, which I'm glad to hear from a lot of our local directors they do have. So with that, Norma, if you could share with the group, what do you see as Main Street's role during this situation? You're on mute, Norma. Hold on a sec, Norma. I think I can unmute you.
Thank you. I did. Thank you. I just wanted to say, not sounding, with lack of humility, but Main Street, in my opinion, is the framework for recovery. We've been using it, like Sherry said, for 40 years plus for revitalization. And that word, revitalize, basically means recovery. And so the opportunity is to look at of course, responding immediately, but now beyond that, looking at the opportunity, number one, to build stability, to bring back some sense of stability that we can make it within the next few months. We will know what to do if we develop a frame, how to use the Main Street approach, but also eventually really lead recovery. By doing it the Main Street way, being always innovative, pushing ourselves to be comprehensive. And of course, this will require a lot of rethinking on what we've been doing. Sometimes it will need to be realigning, refocusing, depending on what we were doing before, how. It's going to be an opportunity to really be an instrument of support that has been needed, but sometimes not as valued. Hopefully now we can build that sense of value that Main Street is the framework for recovery.
Yeah, Tripp, and you've got such an interesting perspective, not being in national or state or local Main Street, but having worked with so many of us. What do you see the role being?
Yeah, thank you. We've been privileged to work in over 40 states and hundreds of Main Street communities, and I couldn't echo better, what Jim and Norma said. I think a couple things that are really important, and Sherry really set the stage. If we look back to the history of this program was born out of decades of systematic dismantling of an economic model that had worked for centuries in the United States and around the world. What Main Street's managed to achieve is a disaster recovery of monumental proportion because it was systematic, it was incremental, it was over time, and it was devastating. So I think putting that in perspective always helps, because sometimes the day-to-day can get us down. So when we go back to those roots of the organization and the Main Street program, it's important to remember what has been achieved. With that being said, I couldn't agree more. Having a seat at the table as a partner with the locality is going to be critically important. And what I'm finding with clients that we're working with right now, and what we find in prior disasters, is the Main Street organization plays a very important economic development role with the downtown merchants, with the downtown services and restaurants. And it frees up the local government to concentrate on some things that they're going to have to deal with that we don't need to deal with. I mean, the emergency worker situation, the overall budget situation, and to have a reliable partner is critical. And then finally, I think, one of the things that we're actively trying to remind folks of is kind of this three-part arrangement, and it's really more than that. But Ben, my brother, talks about the 5 audiences, but I'm just going to talk about 3 right now. The local government relationship, that relationship that Main Street has with its businesses and its downtown stakeholders, and then facilitating that relationship between those businesses and the consumers in the community. So that triple role, I think, is going to be important now more than ever. And we can certainly get into the roles with donors and with property owners as well, which really are kind of the 4th and 5th audiences that we tend to have Main Streets working with.
Yeah, really good perspective. And when we think about sort of the longer game of economic development and how Main Street has played such an important role in that over the last 4 decades, if you could look forward, knowing we don't have that crystal ball, what do you think that economic development in the Main Street context is going to look like in the next several years? How is it different from what Main Streets have been working on? And I'll just bat it back to Tripp on that one, first of all.
Great. Thank you for batting it back to me because I'm itching to answer. I will tell you, those of you who are involved in this, I think, well, your economic development role, your economic vitality role is now going to be more important than it has ever been in the history of your program. One of the things I think we're all kind of dealing with or involved in this is getting a little bit of information overload with various organizations like, ICSC and, Urban Land Institute and some of these other partners that are dealing with things. And when you look at a group like ICSC that deals with retail in a shopping center context, we're systematic collapse of a infrastructure that was not built grassroots, never really was, and that collapse is going to be catastrophic. I don't want to be too negative on that because really the benefit actually in my mind is going to accrue to our independent merchants who are nimble. It's going to accrue to our downtowns who have experience working hand in glove on a whole variety of things and not set kind of in the rails model that dictates I need to do this, that, and the other in order to maintain my quote lease rates and performance data for shopping centers and other retail chains. So I think that's going to be a real sea change that we see. And I'm eager to hear what Jim and Norma have to say about that as well, because some of the data coming out for retail restaurants, nationally is grim, but I see it accruing to the benefit of Main Streets and independent businesses.
If I may go after that, I really appreciate your comments, and you both are in the field often, so you can see that I do and always talk about the twofold of our work. On one hand, we are definitely interested in and committed to the revitalization of the district, and our programming has to reflect that. And of course, sometimes our priorities have been based on comfort zones and the zones that we are able to make happen more quickly than others. And economic vitality is going to have an increased level of attention in our future with regards to programming. It has always been about strengthening the local economy, and everything else that we do should serve that purpose. But in some ways, we will need to realign or refocus on how do we work with and support our existing business base. In the past, we've seen that economic vitality for many it has been more on the focus on recruitment, sometimes not even working with the property owners on that, just feeling that we can strategize on our own and do it for people. One thing you've heard me say over and over again is what we do with versus for, and the importance of doing it with people rather than for their benefit. So our programming needs to increase our focus on economic vitality. But I also use the analogy of, Main Street is like having 4 kids, and forgive me for that example, but you don't necessarily say that because one is at the hospital, you don't care for the other 3. It's an opportunity to focus comprehensively on the needs of what you have at hand and give it the importance and the attention that is needed. Economic vitality has a center focus in our programming. It's always about helping the businesses. But in the past, sometimes we can say that it has been more indirect, and now it has been, this crisis is calling for a direct type of programming in support of businesses. On the other hand, also is how we do our work and the fact that we do need to exist as organizations, right? And so partnerships that really see the value in our position is important. And Tripp, and you can speak more about this, but I always talk about how important is our message and our position with regards to the value that we bring to our communities. And sometimes I think we have failed to really define our story and the story of our value. But this is a great opportunity to say we are the most direct and impactful instrument of support and partner that businesses have had can have in the future. And the same with that liaison, that voice that we can bring to the public sector and work with them as well. So this effort of expanding our reach will be more important than ever, and pushing ourselves to redo the things the Main Street way more comprehensively, again, more focus on the impact that we can provide, especially at this time when our businesses are the ones that require our most attention.
Yeah, thank you, Norma. I totally agree that I think a lot of the strategy through this is going to really look like hunkering down on the Main Street approach, because we know that it works, and we know that the philosophy behind it is really solid. And a lot of the things that have been coming out of National over the last several years regarding really owning that economic vitality piece of it, I think are more relevant than ever. And, you know, Jim, I know that is what you focus on. I'm just so eager to hear what you have to say about what the future of sort of economic development on Main Street looks like.
Thanks. I've been trying to be quiet so I didn't take over the screen. I appreciate Norma and Tripp's views on this. It's really interesting, though, at the grassroots level, when we're really trying to figure out how to do economic development in a Main Street district in a downtown, I really think focusing on a two-pronged approach that can be very comprehensive. We've got to figure out how to get a return on investment, and we've got to figure out how to be better at customer service, meeting customers where they are. So return on investment kind of depends on the hat you're wearing. If you're a business owner, you've got to have a return on investment, or your business is not going to be sustainable. If you're a property owner, you've got to figure out how to get dollars being returned to you on every square foot of a building. The days of not being able to afford to do like upper story housing or have underutilized space have got to be over. To get a quality return on investment, we've got to really maximize every piece of a property that we have. And from an organizational standpoint, return on investment really means why are they investing in our organization, and how can we really prove to them that we're an essential part of this recovery? This is the opportunity that looks at all of us right now. So then I moved to customer service. Customer service really hasn't changed for over 100 years. It's meeting customers where they are. And if you're a business and you're not able to have customers come in your doors, how do you do curbside service or online sales? Meeting them where they are. If you're a property owner, your customer is that leaseholder. What are we doing as property owners to really assist them in their development practices? And as organizations, customer service means meeting all of our donors, all of our supporters, all of the people that love coming to events to really maximize the benefits of a district. And everything, all 4 points, are grounded in economic development. I didn't say economic restructuring there. It's all 4 points in a transformational strategy environment coming out of a pandemic. We've got to figure out how economic development is critical to us moving into the future.
Yeah, well said. And I think that's a really important point we need to keep remembering throughout this, is that this is not the Economic Vitality Committee's job. This is the entire Main Street organization that's working together toward shared goals. And that's really a lot of what this recovery action project that Iowa and Oregon and Washington are launching with this is focused on, is how can we get all of our Main Street committees working together toward meaningful recovery. And you know, you've all touched on this, and it's really important to Sherry and Michael and I as well, that we not just focus on the resiliency of our businesses, because to the credit of the Main Street directors out there, we know you have been working doggedly over the last 2 months to help your businesses in any way possible. But we now want to sort of shift the conversation toward your organizations as well, because your resiliency and sustainability and financing is really important throughout this. So with that, I'll ask Norma to jump on this question. how do you recommend that a Main Street program approach partnerships and budgets right now so that they can be here to support their districts in the long run?
I appreciate the question because it gives us the opportunity to really look at more at what I said is the other fold. Having a dedicated downtown revitalization program is essential for every community. It should be there. It should be supported by public and private sector partners. But the question is, how do we position ourselves with that level of value? And so first is taking a look, inside and more of an interior or internal evaluation of ourselves to take a look and see what is the value proposition that we have at this time. If in the past, we can take a look at what we did, what was of value, bringing it back because you are valuable. And, but also how you responded to this pandemic. How did you communicate and confirm those areas that are so important for the conversations with the public sector and the private sector. So first and foremost, I think it is about packaging the value. And I'm glad that, we have support at different levels in that. So taking a look at organizational and your position, before us, many nonprofits have said throughout the country that the fear of doing something directly connecting them to the businesses and the benefit that these businesses received has to be off our concerns. In today's environment, everybody has to support and strengthen the local economy. So how much of the support we can offer to both the community and the businesses and the property owners and working with them should be then essential to define the plan on how we present our value back to them as well. This is what we can do with your support. And before I think we see too many organizations doing the basics to exist, and I understand that because I've been in those shoes. But it is beyond that opportunity. It is to look at how we can position ourselves to tell our partners that we are the best connectors, the most appropriate liaisons, and the ones that can provide in support with our state partners and our national partners, the technical assistance and support that is needed by the business community in our districts as well. So just among a quick opportunity to say, let's take an internal look at our value, be proud of highlighting it, packaging it, and then having those conversations to see what we can do to confirm support for the immediate term as well.
Thank you so much. I want to hear what Tripp has to say about this now, because I know that sort of packaging of the value statement for a Main Street is so much of what Arnett Muldrow does.
Right. I think having a clear message is so critical. I think I want to start out, though, because we're a small entrepreneurial firm and we started in 2000. So right after the September 11th attacks, and then, lived through the Great Recession, and then, of course, through these disasters. And I can't tell you enough as an entrepreneur how much I empathize with the businesses and with the Main Street organizations as you go through this period. I'm going to kind of break through that part and get to some brass tacks, though, is that, in our line of work as a small consulting firm, we will probably, just like you all in the Main Street program, there's going to be a halo. Probably going to be looking at a year before we start seeing the traditional funding mechanisms that we've had start to evaporate or minimize. So it's critical for us, and I say us, the collective us, not just consulting firms, for the Main Street programs to make that very clearly right now. I'm actually working with a community, I won't name their name. It's a very sophisticated Main Street program, but we're actually helping them, I'll put this, dismantle and reassemble their messaging because it had gotten so bogged down and trying to be everything to everybody that I'm actually working this afternoon on kind of a a mind map, you know, on, all right, this is how message to your business community. This is how we're going to message to the consumers. This is how you're going to message to the city and your investors. They can overlap, but they all need to circle back to your value statement. And what's happened with this sophisticated organization is all those messages have gotten entangled with one another, and we're disentangling them. And what's happening with the organization actually is it's invigorating the staff, because they're actually seeing, it's almost like a light bulb's coming on. It's like, oh, now I see, you know, how we communicate with our businesses and the platform that we use is going to be very different than how we communicate with our customers as we launch a brand new campaign as they reopen. And then certainly the message back to the investment community, another one as well. So within like 4 days, they're going to be on all these different, I say all these different pieces. It's actually kind of a rearrangement of it, but at the same time, a clarification of it. And that makes sense once you see it. And let me just give you an example so that it doesn't sound so esoteric. Their Facebook page, they have a group for restaurants, they have a group for merchants. We're actually kind of dividing it up and basically saying, all right, this is your Facebook page. It's the catch-all for everything. You're not getting much engagement at all on it. There's a brand new Facebook group that in a matter of 4 days, we have 60 businesses that are now part of that Facebook group. That Facebook group is only delivering trainings and resources for businesses. That is the only purpose for it, period. And then there's a consumer Facebook page where in the overall Main Street organization, they're putting out the mayor's statement when he talks about the weather, or when the governor makes a new statement, or when the festival is doing this. This other one is strictly a consumer page. And that one's going to go live within just a few days. And so they get it. They're ready to launch this, but it's kind of had them blow up their messaging and redefine it, but do it authentically. We're not throwing out anything. It's more of a, reorganization in a much clearer way. I hope that helps make sense on some of the practical things that we're looking at in one case study.
Yeah, that's a great example, and one that I think that our team for this recovery action plan should definitely look at, because one of the strengths of the Main Street approach is that we have organization as a point where we're thinking about these kinds of things and actually putting that level of effort toward it, which is very important right now. And Jim, go ahead, Tripp.
I'll say what I'll try and do with the group here, I'm actually kind of drafting that piece, is I'll follow back up with you, Brianne and Sherry and Michael Wagler, and get you what that looks like for the community. And again, please, if you don't mind, it's going to be launched soon. So by the time you get it, it'll be public knowledge. So no need to embargo it. Just do the R&D that we're used to if you want to.
Oh, thank you, Tripp. Really appreciate that. So Jim, you mentioned at the very beginning that you also have worn the hat of city council member. So I'm curious what you have to say about partnerships and budgets for a Main Street program through this.
Sure. It's interesting because when I think about the internal resiliency of a local Main Street program, it's really demonstrating your worth. And I get caught in a little bit of a trap here, because as I sit on that city council, my fellow colleagues would tell me, this is what I wish Main Street would work on. And I would hear all those internal discussions, but it never was public. Nobody would ever, be caught saying that, oh my gosh, we want them to be more than, for example, more than events. Well, everybody knew they were, but their outward expression to the community was really party planners. And it was unfortunate because they didn't think about all the economic development activities that happened because of that. They were thinking about all the fun they had with that. So internal resiliency to me also means being cautious, because as you become a high-performing district and you're doing really all the cool things and four-point approach that a Main Street program can do to build your resiliency into the future, Be really careful, though, that you don't have mission creep. What everybody wants to do at the city level is allow this not-for-profit to do more and more things so that the city doesn't have to do it. Why wouldn't they, right? And so you have to make sure that what your priorities are as a Main Street program are really true to your district, and that you're not allowing somebody else to tell you to take on more and more and more, where it waters down your effectiveness within your district, because now you're doing things that really stretch all your volunteers and your staff time. So make sure that for resiliency purposes, when you focus on your district, you have clear communication lines with all your partners. You'll have that seat at the economic development table, but you'll also be positioned to be that local expert to do what you have to do that's the best thing for your Main Street district.
And so, Jim, a follow-up for that is, what do you see as the board's role right now in planning for recovery?
Well, I think the board, and it's hard right now because I have a lot of friends that are board members in Main Street communities today, and their businesses are in financial ruin, some of them, and they're trying to figure out, how do I balance my personal life, my professional life, my volunteer life? But the truth is, really making a priority for what's the best thing for your district, and how can you come out of this on the other side. I think people love volunteering for successful organizations, and that's what we have to strive. And that's why I get concerned, because when we get a diluted message where we just keep continually saying yes to taking on more and more things when it's not necessarily our role, it really cuts our effectiveness, and we're not as good at what we do. I think we have to be the best at what we do to be effective.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jim. And, you know, Tripp, I wonder, with the communities you're working with right now or past experiences, how have you seen volunteer leaders be really important during these efforts, and what can they be doing, recognizing that not everybody who has participated for the last number of years may have the personal capacity to do that right now, and that maybe more people or different people in the community can step up during this moment in time.
What a great point. And I can tell you from prior disaster recovery experience, we've seen exactly what Jim is describing. Some of the most robust and active board members traditionally, we have to be very sensitive and respectful of the personal trauma that they are currently dealing with. And that they may not be able to do what they've traditionally done, and that we as directors, or as, you know, as their team, need to understand that, respect it. Even internally, you know, we have a rule in the company where we're allowed about 15 seconds to yell at each other, and then we have to be nice. And that just helps us. And if y'all know me and Ben, you know, that's really hard. But it helps us get back focused and allow us to vent a little bit of energy. I was talking with a Main Street manager the other day who had a business vent to her, and they're great friends. And within, you know, 15 minutes, they were back on track again. What we have seen, though, is others step up to the plate. And one of the most poignant examples I can talk about is Sandy Hook. Because the tragedy happened in downtown, and because the entire downtown was basically shut down because of the media storm afterward, the businesses were in a very, very foul mood. Poor, you know, they were really rough, you know, dealing with. And we had other really good leaders step up to the plate, who were there to absorb their frustration and help craft a positive message, so that when that positive message was launched, the businesses were able to kind of get all that off their chest and rally around that message. And that was all kind of gearing up on the 1-year anniversary of the shooting, which, as you remember, was in December. And so by that time, the businesses were ready to very sensitively say, not only we're open and we welcome you, we respect and honor you. And then the other thing is kind of set the boundaries too, on this is what we are and this is what we're not. And so welcome back, come on back. But if you're a media truck, don't come back. And so it kind of echoes a little bit of what Jim said on that creep, keeping that focus really strong. I hope a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate that example a lot. And, recognizing that in that instance in particular, the businesses weren't ready to be the ones to prepare that message, but it did help them to have something that they could use when they were ready. Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make there, Tripp. And, I kind of held on to Norma for a final response on this question, given that you are the Director of Leadership Development for the National Main Street Center. So I know you had a webinar that was largely focused on this very topic, Norma, but what would you say are some of the most important things to keep in mind in terms of board and committee leadership as we do plan for recovery?
Thank you, Brianne. It's truly close to my heart because I think especially in these circumstances, we are giving the opportunity to change the format that we had before about leadership base within the Main Street. And that traditional hierarchy between the board is here, the Main Street director is here, and we have committees here, and push ourselves a little bit more into the team culture. And I would invite the Main Street directors to leverage the possibilities within that area. You are not under, you are a team partner with the board. And the board is a team partner with your executive director, and your committees are team members and partners with you as well. So understanding that we even have an expanded base, not only board members, but committee leaders as well. We need to take a look at the leadership base and lift our eyes, especially for Main Street directors and boards, to define what is the base that can help us move forward during the next few months, understanding some have to deal with their own emergencies and will come back when they are ready. Because to be honest, based on experience in disaster relief, I can tell you that people want to help and people want to make a difference. It's just that level of readiness that we might have right now versus tomorrow or in 3 months or in a year from now. It's not about letting go of people, it's about activation, understanding what they can offer. And more than ever before, it's not about managing volunteer labor, it's about volunteer talent. And therefore, there's an opportunity for us as Main Street directors to really look at our base, put under the 4 point and under the board the list of those talents and skills that you've had through all this time. And perhaps people are telling you that they want to help as well. And so gather that information as well. And then be that talent resource management and the manager that we need to really look and see who are we using for what, and not using, but truly leveraging the skill, the effort, the time that these people can have. So I would encourage boards and Main Street directors to work on who they have, how are they being activated or used under the current circumstances, as far as skills, time, and willingness to support your efforts. And then see the opportunities as you plan the next steps to give people and empower people with more opportunities to lead. Main Street is not about volunteers, it's about volunteer leaders that come into place to support us. And so there's going to be an opportunity to really look at the team culture. How do we build that structure around we are working together? I'm not more than you guys are. As executive directors, we have the privilege of working day to day, full-time on this. But because Main Street is so comprehensive, it is impossible to think that we can do it all. And therefore, there's that lift in an elevator role that we have to say, how do I lead people? How do I influence their actions so that they can be a support system to our organizations, and not just in the board, but also within the community structure. So now perhaps there's a good opportunity to say, board members, perhaps if 60% are there, but 40% need to go and do something else based on their urgencies and emergencies, then how do I activate 40% at least of my committee base and lift them for temporary leadership support in other areas than what they were doing? So we're going to put more on that as we move forward, but definitely want to be of support to you guys and your efforts in that area. Team culture, partnership are key words for these efforts to be successful.
Thank you, Norma. You know, one of the reasons we wanted to start this initiative with a discussion like this is to kind of get on the same page in terms of Main Street culture. And I just really appreciate the three of you for speaking so eloquently about partnerships and the value of Main Street and how we reposition ourselves during this. And so I want to invite people to use the Q&A function. Again, that's at the bottom of your screen. If you can't find that or don't see it, you're welcome to send me a personal chat. Again, I'm Brianne. But as we sort of wait for a couple of questions to come in, one that popped out from the registration process was if you could speak to how a Main Street can prepare itself in terms of potential infrastructure funding that might be coming down. Jim, do you want to take a first stab, or Tripp?
Jim, I'll take a first stab, then kick it over. So I'll tell you what we're seeing is that this is happening in reverse from other disasters. So typically in other disasters, what we see is infrastructure support go to state government and then to localities, and the Main Streets have been able to effectively work with their state departments of community development, or whatever those state departments are. But the state program has been able to coordinate through DR money that comes through FEMA. What's happening this time is backwards, in that the money went directly to businesses through the PPP program, and we see Congress right now stalling on money to states and localities. I feel like, I don't want to be an over prognosticator, but I believe that the state governors and localities and Congress are going to end up really pressuring that to come eventually. So I think it's really important now for individual Main Streets and state programs to understand that because this is what Main Street's great at, with an itty bitty teeny weeny piece of the pie, we can do an incredible amount of good when that money does come in disaster recovery. And that was proven true over and over again in Mississippi and in Vermont when the disaster recovery money did come, is that it leveraged itself 10 times, 20-fold over what was provided. But it was a coordinated effort through Main Street to the local programs in coordination with the state as they were receiving the federal DR money. Sorry, Jim.
No, you're good, Tripp. I 100% agree with you. It's interesting so our Main Street program is located in state government, and it's interesting to be in some of those conversations that money is going to flow. And our state took a little different approach. Our governor immediately went into what we call as a rainy day fund because of the national pandemic and how it's affecting Iowa, with the intention that some of those dollars reinvested in the state will come back through CARES Act or other kinds of reimbursements. And so if you're going to be in that discussion, though, you've got to start the conversations now. Because I think that internal recovery, the money's going to flow to people where they know they need it. And so having those internal discussions at the local level and not being afraid to share those to a state or a national audience is critical. Because you're only going to, I don't want to say squeaky wheel gets the grease, but money flows to where they know it's needed. And I think that's the critical piece right now is, are you having underperforming properties where some kind of reinvestment into infrastructure for properties would be critical to raising the tax base? This is a perfect time for local government to leverage dollars with local property owners and maximize it with other state and federal dollars to increase the value of those buildings. Tax base is going to be really critical coming up. And I think some of those discussions have to happen right now.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add, if that's okay, Brianne, just wanted to add that truly great opportunities ahead because I believe the local the locality, the power within the local communities, within the local districts is the best location for those resources. So the more it comes to the local level, the better it is to be administered. And so we encourage Main Street communities to really take an opportunity, again, come together to see what are the common grounds that you all have between organizations, between the municipality and the Main Street program, but also the distinctive roles that you all can play. Number one thing that the businesses said in our business survey at the National Business Survey that we did recently is that the businesses were concerned about the customer traffic, right? And so customers, again, coming through their doors, understanding that many of them, basically for the most part, almost 70% of the businesses do not have online presence, and also perhaps don't have the know about how to really go about developing their business to the next, or taking it to the next level. And so we need to be that support system, and you need to understand the needs. And in Main Street, we've talked about understanding your local markets and your area. And so the best input that comes is from the businesses themselves, from the consumers in your community, but also from those national trends. If you understand that, you position yourself as the support system our businesses need, and if you connect technical assistance that needs to go there, it's crucial. And then to let our public sector partners know that with regards to infrastructure, we're always also about supporting the work with our property owners so that they can define the strategic use of space within their building and within the district. We can help them doing that. And so again, some of the former facade resource improvement dollars can go into supporting businesses. We've seen that. But when it's about infrastructure, it's not about the building itself as we know it in Main Street. We support, we promote preservation, we promote rehabilitation, but it's about the economic use. What's the best strategy for that building? And then accordingly, how the public space can help us rebuild that sense of safety, security, welcoming, and all the good feelings that come from having the authentic place that downtowns offer in our community. So a lot of opportunities, whether it's for infrastructure or for other incentives and resources that are getting to your communities, need to be seen as an opportunity to work together in partnership with businesses, with public sector, and so forth.
Thanks, Norma. And one of the things that I think a lot of us are grappling with, and then I'm pretty sure is going to come up as we work on this action plan together, is how do you balance what Main Street has done with these new emerging needs and skills? And one question came through about using Main Street funds for beautification work. And I think that sort of harkens to a larger question related to mission creep as well. And I guess I'll frame it like this. How can a Main Street balance its traditional work with the need for new activities and expertise, and knowing you can't, there's only so much time in your day? Do you have any kind of closing advice for how a Main Street can balance traditional work with these new needs?
It's not business as usual. I would go for that and say, do not look at your previous plan and think that you have to make it happen the way it was. Take yourself out of that mindset, because you can't. If you do it that way, you're going to face some impact in your own results. If you want to get an event going in the near future, you need to understand if your consumer, if your community is ready for it, instead of just saying, well, it's in the calendar, so we should make it happen. It really, your assessment, your leadership skill needs to be very crucial with regards to assessing your own conditions, and then strategizing with your board on what is the programming that should be maintained, what's the programming that needs to be put on hold, or perhaps shared with somebody else in the future, because it does not longer impact our opportunities as much as, or our mission as much as we should consider it. So I would say, first of all, let's take a look at that list. Do a one-pager. If you haven't seen my 4-point page, to really look at what goes under each area, I'm happy to provide that, and then assess what you can do and what you should not do. And again, the opportunity to say, for the next little bit, and hopefully throughout the future of your organization, economic vitality, how do we strengthen the local economy, is number one in our list. Anything around that has to be as comprehensive as possible.
Thanks, Norma. I think that is good and empowering to hear that our old work plans don't have to move forward in addition to all of the new needs that are out there. You know, Tripp, may I call on you now and say, do you have anything to say about the balance between traditional Main Street activities and new needs?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. One is, as we've talked today, I think it's important to reinforce that as Main Streets, having to do with economic development, we're like the shortest connection between the independent business community and the decision makers, and we have the knowledge to deliver that in the most efficient way and across communication strategy. Second, and I'm guilty of this, I think we all are guilty of this sometimes, and I see the question about beautification. I also see a question about, you know, individual businesses sharing information. The new normal is going to require us to kind of really think about what to provide the most good for the most businesses. And what I find myself doing and oftentimes see is what I call the wormhole. If you feel like you're going down a wormhole on an issue, you are going down a wormhole on an issue. And so it's time to sort of like cut it. So if you find that, you know, everyone's kind of got their, you know, knickers in a bunch over a particular thing, really isn't a thing, it's time to move on to the thing that can be a thing. And I'll just take I like to be real practical in how I exercise this. So if someone's like debating on an event that is 4 months down the road and you just find that that's taking a ton of time, when really what you should be doing is working with each business to update their Google hours so that when they're Googled, they're the right hours for now, then it's probably more efficient to do that than it is to wreck your brain over an event that you don't know whether can happen at this point or not. So that's the example of how can we do the most good now, rather than getting wrapped around the axle about something that was in the work plan or that has always been what we did, when we need to be kind of doing something completely new that maybe satisfies more good quickly.
If I can jump in.
Please, Jim.
So I agree with Norma and Tripp 100%. I think now is the time that we really focus on our highest priorities. And so if you have a district that is not looking very good and it needs some design enhancements, that can't get left off your list. We've got to look at a 4-point approach and still look at what is the highest priority. The strength of Main Street is not just doing one thing really well, it's doing 4 things in a coordinated effort to really make it the highest priority, the best district we could have. And if customers or visitors aren't coming to your district because it doesn't look very good, that has to be addressed. It has to be. So that will adversely affect economic development if people aren't wanting to come to an attractive district. So try not to let all these higher level discussions about economic development derail the fact that we've got to be the best at each point. And it's not appropriate right now for us to focus on a promotional event that has 1,000 people downtown. But we can do something about a downtown cleanup and empower our volunteers to really make that happen so that they feel part of the solution instead of just looking at a problem.
Very good. I think that if I may summarize your 3 very good responses to that, it is that our work plans will change, that we should continue to lean on the 4-point approach and always use the knickers in a bunch test when faced with difficult decisions. And with that, I want to say thank you so much to all of you. We went over time a little bit, but well worth it. We just really appreciate seeing your faces and hearing your voices on this topic. And to the attendees that are still on with us, thank you so much for joining us. This will not be the last you hear. An extra thanks to the team that's actually going to be meeting tomorrow morning to start this recovery action plan work. So thank you and have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you very much.
I'm missing you all. I'm wishing I were on a plane heading your way.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.